Um, Today we have as our guest David Lange, who is coming to us from Israel. He lives there and publishes a very interesting newsletter. He also has a website called Israeli Cool. And the reason I invited him, and he graciously agreed for the conversation, for the interview, is because he carefully observes all kinds of things related to attacks on Israel and to anti-Semitic tendencies, especially in the United States. And David, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe.
Thank you, Alexander. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. So, as I just said, we invited you because I feel you are an expert on the so-called anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, especially in the United States, maybe and other countries in Europe too, and Israel. I see many of your articles talking about it, and I would like to ask you about it. How long time you've been following these trends?
Well, I started my website, Israeli Cool, in 2003, so 17 or so years, but I think I've focused a lot on anti-Semitism and the intersection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, probably in the last decade or so.
Mhm. And in your experience, the number of attacks covering or hiding behind the mask of anti-Zionism, a number of anti-Semitic attacks covering behind the mask of anti-Zionism have increased or decreased, or give us some idea of what you see.
Just if you could clarify, by attacks, you mean what, verbal attacks online? What do you mean by attacks?
Verbal attacks online, and if you followed some statistics about attacks against Jews and against Israeli symbols outside of Israel or inside of Israel too, just general idea of whether it's increasing or decreasing.
I don't have any statistics on me at the moment, but what I can say is this. Almost in all cases, if not all, when someone claims to be only anti-Zionist, there's anti-Semitism involved. There's anti-Semitism involved. And I do this, let's say, a scientific study, as it were, on my website, where I have this series called Anti-Zionist, Not Anti-Semite, where I go to social media posts of a person who is hating on Israel online, whether on Facebook, Twitter, or some other form of social media. And what I see from these posts are the most vile anti-Semitic tropes imaginable in all cases. I guess theoretically there might be a small percentage or 2% of people who are anti-Zionist without really knowing what the word Zionism means. Maybe they're a bit critical of Israeli policy and they're ignorant, but in almost all cases it's actually anti-Semitism at play. So that's not really a statistic, but that's my own experiment, as it were.
That's all I can ask for. But my feeling is that those people that are starting with the anti-Zionism, probably they're just budding anti-Semites and just trying to find their way around.
Yeah, this is what I think as well. Absolutely. I think that they're really anti-Semites. I'll use the term Jew hater. There's a reason for that. Maybe we'll discuss it a bit later. And they've been hiding under the guise of anti-Zionism for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Uh, it, it, how do people in your mind differentiate anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism? Is it just because they attack Israel or policies in Judea and Samaria or what they call West Bank, or how do they, in their own mind, for example, let's talk about specifically Jewish so-called anti-Zionists. I mean, some of the more famous ones, but one organization that is very interesting, Jewish Voices for Peace. It seems like every anti-Semitic non-Jewish organization requires at least some presence of these Jewish, so-called Jewish voices for peace in order to cover up their butt against accusations of being anti-Semitic. What do you say about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's an interesting example. Jewish Voices for Peace. It's debatable, first of all, whether they're Jewish. I actually had a post a year or two ago where I found that the administrator of the Facebook page for that organization actually was out of Lebanon, or one of them.
Wow.
So I don't know if there are that many Jews in Lebanon at the moment, but I smell a rat, first of all. And as for the words for peace, well, need I say any more?
It very well may be that there are some Jews in Lebanon, but they're probably doing everything they can in their power in order to please their non-Jewish neighbors and to say, look at this, I'm a different Jew than you can imagine. I'm against Israel. I'm against other Jews too. The same way in Iran, there's a small Jewish community, and every time I see some of the Jewish guy in Iranian parliament, he's just attacking Israel, attacking. No?
Yeah, no, I guess it is theoretically possible, but I've been been around the block a few times, and I know for the most part many of these organisations, they're co-opting Jews, and they contain a lot of non-Jewish people who claim to have some sort of Jewish ancestry. Whether that's a moot point. Going back to your question, I mean, yes, the anti-Semites or the anti-Zionists love the fact that there are Jews. You know, it's the whole thing about some of my best friends are Jewish. It's an alibi against accusations, valid accusations of anti-Semitism. And the prevalence of left and far left-wing Jews, anti-Zionist Jews, and by the way, getting back to your question, what is anti-Zionist in their minds? It's not just criticizing some policies. Israelis criticize policies of our government. I criticize policies of our government. That's fine. It's actually invalidating the whole existence of a Jewish state of Israel. And that's what they're doing. And that's not just criticizing Israel. That's invalidating Israel as a Jewish state. And that's in their minds as well as in my mind, what they're about.
Uh, are they effective, these so-called anti-Zionists? Or, I mean, right now, the way I feel it, it seems like they're popping everywhere. So there has to be some effectiveness or at least support base for them. But are they really effective? Do they change things in diaspora and in Israel in terms of government policies or public opinion in Israel?
No, I don't think they're making any inroads in terms of policies in Israel, but in terms of effectiveness in brainwashing young minds, especially in the States, on college campuses, then I would say that they are quite effective, because that's what we're seeing, especially amongst the millennials. Many of them appeal to college students, and it's all about marketing, and it's under the guise of human rights. And this is what a new trend we're seeing, especially in the States right now. There was a time when, being anti-Semitic, after the First World War, of course, we had a bit of a breather, as it were, us Jews. And there was still some anti-Semitism, but that would have been the province of the right and the far right. But the left wing back then were actually quite pro-Israel, as you're probably aware. And things changed, I'd say, after the Six-Day War, when we liberated our lands, what they call the occupied territories, although they really mean the 48 lands. When they talk about occupied territories, the entire state of Israel.
David, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Not all left was pro-Israel. The communist left was never pro-Israel, except one little bump when Stalin decided to recognize Israel.
Correct. No, that's absolutely right. But what I mean is there was much support for Israel on the left, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And that changed because of the whole paradigm of the left. They look at, let's say, they have a socioeconomic view of morality, which looks at the powerful and successful party as necessarily evil, when there's a weaker party, and that weaker party must, by definition, be weaker because the more powerful party has somehow suppressed them and repressed them. And that doesn't take into account the reality, especially in the case of the Palestinian Arabs, whereby their plight is pretty much the result of their own actions. The fact that they've invested so much time, effort, and money into terrorism and terrorist infrastructure instead of nation building and state building. Whereas Israel's successful because of our ingenuity and because our survival instinct, and that's what we want to bring good into the world.
David, I think that you're giving them a lot of credit for just simply coming to this position from the point of view that they just want to defend the underdog. Let's not forget that anti-Zionism on the left was part of the ideology going 100 years before, to before Russian Revolution, to Marx. Anti-Zionism was an integral element of Russian social democracy and of Tsar at the same time.
That's definitely part of it. But what I'm saying is there was a transition from the people that were on the left that were supporting Israel, okay, not the people you're talking about, but the ones that I described, that they don't support Israel anymore, and that's because of the construct that I've just described. Of course, you're right, it's more complex than that if you look at the left as a whole, but the left isn't a monolithic thing. But there's been this gradual trend over time, and then of course you had in 1975 the UN resolution, Zionism is racism, and from then on I would say it's been a progression where you've seen anti-Semites on the left. There've always been anti-Semites on the left, but they've hidden behind this guise of anti-Zionism. And now I'd say we've gotten to a point of view now because they're in bed with, let's say, Islamic anti-Semites, as well as now, for instance, Black Lives Matter, this whole intersectionality going on where you've got anti-Semitism there, which is more overt anti-Semitism. And for instance, in the Black Lives Matter organization, there are many what I would call Farrakhan anti-Semites who are overt. They don't hide behind anti-Zionism. They call us Jews the synagogue of Satan. They call us fake Jews. But the left is now allies with these people. And that's what I'm saying. There's been this progression, and we're seeing less of this hiding behind anti-Zionism and more sort of a step forward into full-blown anti-Semitism, although there are still many, don't get me wrong, many on the left who are still hiding behind anti-Zionism, but they're not doing such a good job because they use the word Zionist, but they use every anti-Semitic trope in the book, and it's very easy to identify.
There was a few days ago an article in Tablet magazine by Leo Leibovitz, who was talking about the position from his point of view and from my point of view, horrible position that was taken by Anti-Defamation League that used to be very prestigious and very strong defender of Jewish interests, and not only Jewish interests, but basically interests of anybody, any minority, anywhere. And today, it seems like under the leadership of this Greenblatt, who was working with Obama administration and before, he is a leftist, and now Jews, the way I feel, and I agree with Leibovitz, Jews do not have ADL as defender of Jewish interests in the United States. And I do not see any other active defender of Jews in the United States anywhere. I mean,
from the large organizations, yes. And that's a good point. I did read the article, by the way. Mm-hmm. The problem is this. Currently, as defined by the ADL and others, there's a good anti-Semitism, I call it good, and a bad anti-Semitism, the one that you have to act against. And they are both forms of anti-Semitism. So there's definitely the right-wing anti-Semitism, the far right. That's, of course, Jew hatred. But that's the only one the ADL will go after. And that they sort of pin it on President Trump, because they say that he's got a very large far right-wing following. But the more, and I call it more pernicious form of anti-Semitism, which I think is on the left, because it hides under the guise of human rights. Don't get me wrong, when I say more pernicious, I know that on the far right, the anti-Semitism is more likely to be manifest in extreme violence. Okay, but I would say there are less instances of that than the widespread attitudes on the far left of anti-Semitism. But the ADL, you're right, the ADL isn't willing to call that out. And when they issue reports, they discount many of those instances of anti-Semitism. But it's not just the ADL. Of course, you have this other example. So ADL, they went after Facebook, I believe. This was from the article that you quoted, for the pro-Trump ads. And who was their ally in this? Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton, who is an anti-Semite himself, who was very responsible for the Crown Heights riots back in '91 that ended in the death of Yankel Rosenbaum, a yeshiva student. And he's got the kashrut, the heksha, the stamp of kashrut, of approval from the ADL. He never apologized. He gets a free pass because he's not a far right-wing anti-Semite. He's a minority, he's a member of a minority of the black community, so he somehow gets a free pass. That's the ADL. You also had I think it was the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, which is an umbrella group in the States.
Well, it's not very powerful organization, never really done anything much. I mean, it's just there, formally there. Yeah.
Symbolically, because it unites about over 100 local Jewish communities. So it has some sort of gravitas on some level. But they signed on also to partner with Al Sharpton for his virtual march. And then you have the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, which was cheering on Mayor Bill de Blasio, who, as you know, he was blatantly targeting Jews recently with the coronavirus. So you've got all these instances where you're right, the Jewish community doesn't have a large organization really going into bat for them against all forms of anti-Semitism. Only the politically correct one and the other one they ignore.
And talking about Sharpton and ADL, today ADL leads attack on Facebook. Now, I do not know your opinion. It may be different. My opinion is that by comparison to all social platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Google, Facebook allows the greatest amount of freedom of opinion by far. I have personal experience with both Facebook and YouTube, and Facebook beats Google hands down. Google is very hypocritical. You know, it allows many anti-Semitic channels exist on its platform. But when Jews come out and try to defend ourselves, we try to defend ourselves against those anti-Semites, this is hate speech. I do not know if you noticed it, or maybe you have a different opinion.
I mean, maybe I have a slightly different opinion. I think they're all pretty bad at the moment. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I do know that Facebook has a long way to go, although they do have this, I think, advisory council or overseeing council made up of a number of people from different countries, including one Israeli, by the way, to help identify. So they're definitely aware of the problem, and I think they are trying to rectify it. But there is still a big problem on Facebook. I'll give you an example. There are still many anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi Facebook pages. And not only has Facebook said that they don't go against the community standards, okay, where some Jewish pages have been banned and for no hate speech. So there's something wrong there. Okay, maybe that's improving a bit, I don't know. But not only that, but if an anti-Semite joins one of these neo-Nazi Facebook pages, their recommendation engine, you know, you've got this on the side, we recommend for you other pages. It will bring up other neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic pages. I'm not even kidding. There was a research paper that recently came out highlighting this. So there's still got a problem, but I do realize that it does take time.
You see, you see this problem at a little different angles than I do. I have to say, I have no problems with the Nazi and anti-Semitic pages.
You believe in full blanket freedom of speech, in other words?
Yes, I do. I do not believe that an attempt to restrict Nazis or my enemies would lead to anything good. In fact, they're just going to find different ways and different channels to go through. Right now, we see who they are. We can identify them. We can watch them. I do not believe in restriction on speech of people. I wanted to say my enemies. They're not of people I completely disagree with or disapprove.
No, I agree with that. My only difference with you there would be when there's incitement to murder.
That's different.
Then I think
but look at this. You
off the
would not
line.
know about this incitement to murder if those people were not allowed to speak at that particular moment. Meaning, previously they would be blocked. They go to some other private channel, private network, and that's where they incite to murder, and nobody sees it.
That is true, but what I mean is Facebook, and it's a huge platform, they're able to influence more people and recruit more people. They
And
use it
so
as the tool to broadcast.
and so in attack on those Nazis, I mean, we can see they're growing, and we can see and we can react appropriately. Now, I do not know how far it's going to go. I know that America is changing in this way, and the open anti-Semitic attacks are becoming more prevalent and more acceptable in wider range of American society. That bothers me a lot, but I am not in favor, for example, of the way it's done in Germany, where they just outlaw particular type of speech on networks, because the anti-Semitism is growing in Germany by leaps and bounds anyway. We see not only attacks on Jews, but we also see in everyday behavior of non-Jews toward Jews. It's changing. And the blocking of free speech, I am for free speech completely. If you want to say something real nasty toward me, fine. It just means what? I'm not going to talk to you next time. I'm not going to recommend you to, etc., etc., etc. Do you understand me? But you are responsible. You know, it's like those people that you identify as anti-Semites. What if they would be part of some secret network, you know, that you have no access to?
Yeah,
How
well,
would you
I mean, I like, so for instance, I don't try to block those people. I like to highlight their posts because I'm proving a point with those people. I'm showing how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism almost all of the time. And but what I'm getting at here is that Facebook, what they could do is they could mark certain things so that people, the discerning reader, would see, this is tagged as hate speech. So at least they know that this contravenes the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So not actually removing necessarily the page in question or the post, but tagging it. Just like you see on Facebook, they're tagging things as fake news. It's some sort of, and that way, when you see it, you go, and you know, if you're someone that is maybe influenced by certain things, you're not necessarily full-blown anti-Semite, but you might be influenced by something. You know, these tags could somehow help. So at the very least, I would expect them to do something along those lines, rather than just like allow them to post anything without any kind of you know, categorization.
Well, maybe. I do not know. I believe in free speech on public square, period. And if it gets over a particular red line, if they start organizing or calling for, why go far? There was looting in Chicago recently. And all those gang members, you know, were running to Michigan Avenue because and police saw it on the social media.
Yeah.
And they were able to respond. Now, let's say that they would be doing something in their own network. Police may or may not see it. I do not know. In any case, I don't believe that if some reputable person calls for violence or calls for action that is illegal, then he is going to be held responsible for that and should be held responsible for that. But if this is just his opinion, I can come out, I can take his opinion, I can say this is a buffoon, this is an anti-Semite, this is a pig, this is etc., 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 and I should have the right to do it too. But at this time, I send you, I think, the Bob Dylan song that I illustrated with videos. Bob Dylan's song, Neighborhood Bully, was blocked by Google within an hour as a hate speech. Bob Dylan, Nobel Prize laureate. What was hateful about it? I do not know. And Google does not respond. And also, if, let's say, that we go with some modified form of censorship, by the way, I believe that ultimately any form of censorship that Jews may advocate for our preservation will come back to bite us in the butt. No doubt in my mind whatsoever. This happened, in the Soviet Union, because in 20s, anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic speech was a no-no in the Soviet Union. We know what it turned by 30s. It turned into blockage of anything the Jews could say or write about themselves as Jews. Because once you start on the road to censorship, there's no end to it. And today, this campaign against Facebook is being led by Anti-Defamation League, led by a new Anti-Defamation League led by Greenblatt. I do not know. And many people, I see that you're also supporting some form of this thing. I'm not. I believe that Nazis should show themselves as Nazis. Racists should show themselves as racist. People that do not have any respect for law should show themselves as such too. But it does not mean that I'm going to be watching them. But I do not know. And your newsletter, your work, in my mind, is very, very important, because you point those people for what they are. And that is, to my mind, is the most important counter-attack that we as Jews can offer. Unfortunately, outside of Israel, we have only words. But that's what our faith is all about, words. By the way, you probably heard about this Barry Weiss that used to work for New York Times.
Of course, yes.
She's no longer with them. And she wrote before she left, because of anti-Semitic feelings that build up within New York Times. She wrote a piece talking about how to fight against anti-Semitism. I do not know. Did you read that piece?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. What do you think about it?
No, I think it was a very powerful piece, and I think she was a very brave lady to do what she did. I don't agree with her on everything in general, but the New York Times is it's really fallen from grace. I've been actually following, one of the features I do on my website as well is I look at history, and a lot of times I will quote the New York Times going back, early last century, and they were reporting really well, even in terms of the lexicon they were using. There's for example, you've probably seen this, Alex. I think it was an article from like the 1930s or 1940s about an Arab boycott of Palestinian goods. The Palestinian goods were the Jewish goods. It was an Arab boycott. That's just one example. So to see the New York Times fall from grace like it has is something I've been watching for a while, and Barry was able to sort of shine a light on that.
But New York Times has a very interesting thing. It was started, well, in a real sense as New York Times. It was started by the Jewish publisher, and his offsprings eventually became, left the mainline Judaism, intermarried, etc., etc., etc. And I have to say that New York Times loves being called anti-Semitic. That's the problem, with some of the anti-Semites, because in order to please their people who they want to please, they love to be called anti-Semites. So there's no actually I do not see any way to attack them, because when you attack them as anti-Semitic, they feel you're putting a medal on their chest that they can show to their other people that they want to be liked by. Do you understand what I mean?
I know what you're saying. I'm not sure I fully agree with that, but I don't think they see it as a medal per se. Maybe it doesn't bother them as much as it should.
Look, during the war, uh, the whole European murder of Jews was grossly underreported by New York Times. In 1914, 1915, during the butchery of Russian Jews by Russian army, New York Times did not produce one article about it, despite the fact that all Yiddish press in New York was full of it. New York Times wants to be a Gentile newspaper. It does not want to be perceived as Jewish newspaper. That's why it bends over backwards in order to please Gentiles, anti-Semitic Gentiles if it has to be, but not the Jews.
Yeah, I was about to say that, because of course there are many Gentiles who are philo-Semites, pro-Israel, that also are disgusted by the New York Times.
Well, thank God for them. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot. In fact, in the United States, percentage-wise, it seems like more than any other country so far. We'll see where it will go. I mean, I do not know the future, but in any case, David, so what is your bottom line on your feeling about the state of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism in the United States, looking from Israel?
That's a tough question, but look, I'm disturbed. Let's put it that way. I'm very, very disturbed by what I'm seeing. As I mentioned before, it started off after the Second World War, anti-Semitism in pockets and the extremes of society. Now, not only is it mainstream, but it's sexy, it's trendy, it's human rights, and it's gone all the way now to the point. I don't know if you've noticed this, but of course, you know that you have Linda Sarsour and others who are saying that if you are a Zionist, you are a racist. But some of them are even going further and saying if you are a Zionist, you are an anti-Semite. I see this all the time. It's called gaslighting. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's when you basically make the person you're speaking to feel like they're crazy. You turn everything around on them. And I see this a lot. They say, first of all, there's an inherent problem with the term anti-Semitism or anti-Semite. That's why I've tried. I don't mind using it, when I'm discussing it with fellow Jews, but it's a Jew hater or Jew hatred is probably better, because one of the reposts that I see a lot is, but wait a minute, we're the Semites, we're Semitic people. They kind of play a semantic game with you, which you can kind of lose focus on that. If someone's watching and they're not really attuned to the background behind the term anti-Semitism, which was actually invented by German anti-Semite to describe the Jews, then
those Semites that claim a shield of being Semitic people had no problem of working together with Nazis,
Yes.
during the Second World War.
Yeah. So that's one thing, but they also call us anti-Semitic because of what we discussed before, because there are so many misguided Jews on their side, misguided Jews who are standing side by side with Linda Sarsour and Rashida Tlaib and these sorts of people, that when you criticize them, like Jewish Voice for Peace and Code Pink Jews and all these people, they come back at you and say, "Oh, you're being anti-Semitic because you're saying I'm a bad Jew. That's anti-Semitic." So they're playing all these sorts of word games with us, but you see it a lot now, and it's. I mean, how much further can you go than that? When anti-Semites start going to proud Jews and saying to them, you're the anti-Semite, or the fake Jew, as it were. So that's what I'm saying. It's getting more, it's accelerating, and
Yeah,
also
but they really know who they are, and when
probably
Jewish Voices for Peace accuse Israel or other Jews of being anti-Semitic, um, nobody takes it seriously. I mean, the only reason they exist is for anti-Semites, in order to have them conveniently. I mean, in your recent newsletter, there was one guy who was proud anti-Zionist, and he was complaining that no Jew came to his defense. That was funny.
he's a neo-Nazi planning some sort of revolution. He wasn't a left-wing. Let's just make it clear. He's a white nationalist. This guy,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, and he uses the word Zionist, but hates Jews. I mean, it's very clear. He actually does slip up and use the word Jew a lot. But then he was like, "You're right." He was complaining. You see, no Jews would come to my defense. That shows how bad they are. I
Yeah.
mean, this is how crazy these people. But just because they're crazy doesn't mean you can't take their threat seriously.
I take their threat and their rise and the rise of their influence very, very seriously.
Must do, yes.
You know, and I have to tell you, that when the question comes up, what will happen if the United States will collapse? Because this is probably the last truly multicultural society on the face of the earth, and free and democratic. And if it collapses, so probably I'll need to buy something close to where you live.
I mean, if you can, you should anyway, but that's a different topic. But yes, it is very worrying what we're seeing. And, again, it's coming from all directions, right? You got the far right, the
Far
far
right.
left. I mean, they're very hard to discern sometimes. I don't know if you saw this, but about a month or so ago, I had a quiz on my blog, on my website, called "Who Said It? David Duke or Louis Farrakhan?" You got the far right, former KKK wizard versus the black anti-Semite, and not one person. I think hundreds of people took the quiz. No one was able to get 100%. I think the most some people got maybe was 8 out of 10. Because I mean, it's really, they're saying the same things, the same talking points. And I could do it also for Arab anti-Semitism and Nazi, like the Sturmer anti-Semitism in terms of the cartoons, the octopus enveloping the world, similar themes, similar tropes. So you see all these different parties, shouldn't have anything in common. What should Louis Farrakhan have in common with David Duke? David Duke would hate black people. But I wouldn't say they're bonded, they don't really bond, but let's say they're united in a sense, for the hatred for the other, the Jew. And that's with the left and the right as well. So we're as usual, the canary in the coal mine.
Well, anyway, this is what we are, and this is what we're going to be. And I'm very proud of being part of the people where a person like you is living and working. In any case, David, nice talking to you,
Thank
and
you.
I wish you the very, very best, and stay safe. Do not try to catch any corona. I think
Doing my best not to.
not. That's good. That's good. In any case, have a great day and the very best, and hope to talk to you again sometime in the future.
Looking forward to it. And you have a great day too. Take care.